Well, with us to review the papers, the sociologist Ashley Frawley and co-founder of Challenges NI, Thomas Copeland. Morning, guys. Lovely to see this bank holiday Monday. And you're going to start, obviously, this lovely bank holiday Monday with Brexit.
Just to ruin the day.
Yeah, great. What's the story? Front page of the Times.
This is the front page of the Times. The Prime Minister has been warned that more than 100 rebels could try to block her softer deal. So this is her negotiations that continue with the Labour Party, which I'm really questioning the point of. I don't quite understand what the end goal seems to be here. What amazed me this morning is reports leaking, earlier this week, saying that the Tories are expected to propose a temporary customs union, then trade agreements could be negotiated but not signed, and then Labour would argue that that would be temporary, and permanent, I should say, and then Tories would argue that that would be temporary. And I sort of thought to myself, that's exactly what the withdrawal agreement was. You had an open-ended political declaration that was non-legally binding. I cannot understand what the purpose in all of this is, except...
Isn't it just to signal that there has been progress, to keep the wolves from the door?
It's just that the Labour Party can put a stamp on it and say, yes, we bailed out the Tories, we're responsible for delivering Brexit. And it seems to me, at a time when Labour are losing their northern heartlands, which were Leave voting constituencies, and they decided they want to get their fist in on the Brexit negotiations. I cannot understand what the point of this is, and the danger, actually, is that all of the success that Theresa May has garnered so far in trying to bring people on side, vote for my deal, she will lose in an instant, because there is no Tory out there who's prepared to put their seal of approval on a negotiated deal that's been done with Corbyn.
Ashley, your view on this?
Yeah, I've been really annoyed by the politicking, the sort of partisan politics. Obviously, that's fine. There should be partisan politics, but actually, it's presenting something that isn't actually that much debated. There isn't that much difference between the two parties being presented as this huge divide between the parties, and also what's being presented to people as a debate is what was in May's deal anyway.
Do you think they'll reach an agreement? The steer was in the papers yesterday that by Tuesday, say tomorrow, an agreement may be reached.
The front page of the Express says it's 99% done.
Rory Stewart on the front page of the Express saying it would be 99% done. The same man who said that 80% of the British population supported Theresa May's deal in the first place. I cannot see a no deal, in my mind, will be done before the European elections at the end of the month. Not a chance.
Actually, this story in front of the Mail, the risks of giving birth at night or weekend. I suppose there will be plenty of people who will not be surprised by this, but the statistics are quite worrying.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is nothing new. This is a finding that's been confirmed many times. So this particular review found that 3/4 of maternity units have no consultants on site at night. So it was an audit basically saying that women are left in the care of midwives, exhausted junior doctors. Now, of course, midwives do an amazing job, but what I find very interesting about this is that, as a sociologist, medicalization is this sociological term that's one of the very few. We love to coin really ugly terms, but one of the very few that everyday people understand, to make something medical. And what I find very interesting is that it's actually been very powerful in the field of childbirth, that we believe that most births should be unmedicalized, in the care of midwives. But actually, what audits like this show is the demonstrable benefit that medicalization has actually had, obviously in combination with improvements to diet,
particularly when something goes wrong.
Exactly, and we're actually able to have these home births and so on because we can be, rushed off to the hospital to be in the care of consultants if something goes wrong.
Thomas, inside the Telegraph, the web must be regulated according to the brother of one of those caught up in the blast.
Yeah, a brother of the two of the victims from the Sri Lanka attacks is saying that the web needs to be further regulated. I thought this was particularly interesting, coming almost immediately on from the Christchurch atrocity, where we saw Facebook and Reddit and YouTube had a really important role to play in terms of streaming and allowing content to make its way around the web for so long. I think there needs to be a groundswell really from people as well. We've seen in the areas particularly to do with climate change where people voting with their feet, deciding to go to certain brands or make sure that the big social media giants know enough about what they want. For too long, moderating content has not been something that these big tech giants value as part of their branding, and that's what needs to change more than different regulations. And I think Facebook's come to recognise that as well. For years, Silicon Valley and the big tech giants have been saying, no, we can self-regulate, we can do it all ourselves. And now actually you're seeing people like Mark Zuckerberg going to big governments and saying, no, you should do the regulating for us, because they're now suddenly afraid about being accused of infringing upon free speech. They're the ones who are making all the profits off the back of social media, users, and advertising. They should be the ones that are setting the rules, making sure that people are safe. It bemuses me that for years this astonishing change of tune from big tech companies. Yeah,
but isn't there a risk though, Ashley, and this kind of is touched on in the article, the next article, Donald Trump accusing Facebook of censoring the right, that organisations like Facebook, like Twitter, just start to appear a little bit overly censorious. Yeah, actually, the whole point of the internet back in the day was it was this place for completely free expression where you didn't have governmental oversight to the extent of kind of ordinary regulated speech.
Yeah, I think there's a danger in making people out to be these sort of Pavlovian dogs who salivate at the sound of a bell. I saw something on social media and I'm just going to act now. I think that's a really, really superficial understanding of social problems, of why things go wrong, of why horrible events like this happen. What people saw it on social media. Hey, that's a great idea. Think it's an expression of deep tensions within cultures. And until we grapple with that, we're just going to, champion really, really damaging forms of censorship that ultimately do more harm than good.
Guys, let's pause there for a second. Jackie's been taking a look at the back pages, and what do you got? Football, disappointment, I suspect.
Well, not disappointment yet. The title race this season has been unbelievably special. Liverpool and Man City pushing each other and pushing each other to greater things. It's the first time in a season two teams have reached 90 points. In any other year, their points total would be enough to be champions. But this season, one of them will be disappointed, or probably gutted, to put it properly. How do you get over getting so close to winning your prize and failing, even though you could barely have done more? Anyway, tonight, Man City versus Leicester, win for City. They go top again. I mean, one of them's going to have a terrible summer. That's all I'm going to say. How do you get over it? You probably don't.
Jackie, thank you very much indeed. Guys, let's turn our attention to page 9 of the Express. And the talk of perhaps as many as a million species around the world facing extinction. I suppose my problem when reading a story like this is I don't know quite how to contextualise that, whether a million species facing extinction is a big number or not particularly big, given the amount of biodiversity that there is.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. You have to put it in the context of exactly how many species there are on the planet. But actually, the thing that I find concerning about this particular framing is the way that it's, how man's actions may doom a million species. It's mankind in the abstract, which is actually a really misanthropic way of framing a problem like this. So the problem is just man, right? So what do? Make less of man, make less human beings. That is really scary. If you want to grapple with a situation like this, you need to understand the economy that goes into air pollution. It's big industry that's the biggest polluter, not like whether or not I'm throwing my food out. It's crazy, and I think it's actually really, really, really dangerous to say, well, it's just human beings, it's human activity. No, it is human activity within a particular context.
But maybe it's linked to the next story, which we're going to look at, which is in the Express, isn't it? No Wi-Fi and it's full. It shows that people are not visiting the countryside because they think it's boring and there's no Wi-Fi. So there's no link, is there? So, why do people care about saving all these species? What do you...
I thought that was it. I don't know why it jumped out at me. No Wi-Fi and it's dull. I think it's really interesting to see the number of people that... It's clearly people who don't go to the outdoors enough that then don't appreciate them.
So they're losing that link, aren't they?
I think so.
Ownership.
And interestingly, actually, what my primary school and secondary school did, for example, was actively try to take school trips out into the countryside and foster a kind of interest in the great outdoors, which I think is probably a wise way to do it. If you're a young person who grows up in the city and is constantly in an urban environment, then of course you're never really going to appreciate a world that is without Instagram and you can't constantly scroll. It stands to reason. What I found interesting about the previous story was that has to be one of the few red squirrels that I've seen in recent years. We used to have red squirrels. We used to have red squirrels when I was a child, jumping around in the garden, and now it's all grey squirrels, and I hate them.
And no
red
hedgehogs.
ones. Yeah.
Have you seen a hedgehog recently?
I haven't been really looking for them, I have to admit.
We keep having every
That's
Christmas card, a card you see of Britain or Ireland always has red hedgehogs. That will be extraordinary. Red squirrels or hedgehogs.
We'll get them back. We'll get them back.
I'm furious about this.
We'll get them back after Brexit. Don't worry about it, guys. We will see you next hour. Let's see how the weather's looking this Bank Holiday Monday with Isabel. here with their selection of the papers, the sociologist Ashley Frawley, the co-founder of Challenges Northern Ireland's Thomas Copeland. Morning, guys.
Morning.
Morning.
Well, let's dive into the ongoing Tory leadership battle, despite the fact we don't know when Theresa May is ultimately going to be stepping down. And I have to say, I saw this article this morning, and it just had the feel of the 20th century about it, bringing out the wives.
Yeah, exactly. This is the Tory leadership catwalk where everybody's decided get their partner on their arm and walk up and down. Probably because means success of people like Sherry Blair have done so well in advertising. A couple and a family unit. And actually, you've seen Dominic Raab, Jeremy Hunt and a few of the other leaders, Matt Hancock, have all been bringing out and emphasising their family in particular, probably because they want to push against Boris Johnson's tumultuous personal life and set themselves up as a role model on a family unit.
But just that comparison, I mean, it begs the question, does anyone within the Conservative Party care about this sort of thing, given that amongst grassroots members, Conservative associations, Boris Johnson polls far ahead of everyone else?
I mean, that's going to be the real challenge over the next while, is what that new leader is going to look like. The party and Party HQ and probably most of the MPs want it to be somebody like Sajid Javid, somebody like Jeremy Hunt, who was probably a Remainer, a one-nation Conservative, whereas the voters want somebody much more like Dominic Raab, much more like Boris Johnson, who's really been a Brexiteer right from the start. And that's what Dominic Raab's been trying to do over the last while. Reading through this article, you're seeing him trying to show off his compassionate side with concessions to fathers for paternity leave and maternity leave, cutting rates of income tax. All of this seems to be, in my mind, rather fruitless, though, because Theresa May still hasn't set her departure date. And even if she did, it wouldn't matter. Because until such a time when Brexit is delivered, the Tory party will not be able to reset. In a way, I think Theresa May is going to have to be the sacrificial lamb. She's going to have to deliver Brexit in some form. And then the Tory party is going to have to boot her out, come in behind her, reset and say, well, listen, this is our vision for the future. Until that happens, there is not a chance that a leader will change anything.
Meanwhile, Ashley, the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer, is in talks with the trade unions about raising the minimum wage.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting story. So there, a lot of countries around the world are sort of competing with each other in some ways to show, that they are getting rid of low pay. And so there's talks now that the goal would be to have the minimum wage at 66% of median earnings. So that would be about $9.61 an hour. And now the thing is that what needs to be understood about these kinds of moves is that these are wins for working people, obviously. Working people have always been fighting for more. But you have to recognize that it's a win against the economy. It's a win against capitalism, not for it. So higher wages mean less profit gets reinvested, which means less competitiveness. And that can lead to capital flight and automation.
Why does the same argument that applies to tax cuts, leading to an injection of cash into the economy? I mean, that's just more cash in people's pockets. Raising wages results in the same thing. Why is the same argument not made?
Because there's less profit being made. You make less profit when you pay workers more. Now that doesn't mean you don't fight for that. You do, but you recognise that that these things are concessions, and that you get ready to escalate and the struggle. You can't rely on governments to protect workers. Workers have to recognise that. And I think what's worrying me is that a lot of young people in particular think that governments are the protectorates of workers' rights instead of workers themselves.
And I think a new 21st century angle to this as well is if you're going to increase minimum wage, you can't stand back and become surprised when Burger King and McDonald's all decide to use automation instead of employing people within their, there's a real chance that if you increase minimum wage to the extent where businesses say, well, listen, we're better to invest in automation than to pay real people, then you find the unemployment rate skyrocketing as well.
Doesn't mean you don't fight for it, but you just get recognised.
It's a balance.
We're a bit pushed for time this hour, but I just want to touch on this story. Bristol University, following in Cambridge's footsteps, I think it is, delving into their kind of organisation's links to the slave trade.
Yeah, so the University of Bristol is looking to create a permanent academic post in the history of slavery, following Cambridge to figure out the university's historical links to the slave trade. And I think this is actually, yes, there's a really strong, a really problematic history, right, that needs to be contended with and understood. But at the same time, I worry that this is an attempt to turn history into this kind of melodrama of victims and villains, good and evil, when actually it's not so clear-cut. Those who are the villains in one era are the victims in the next.
Maybe not with slavery, though. Do you not think it's a bit more clear-cut?
No, I don't think so. Like, you have the enclosures, for instance, in the UK, and who was hurt by that? Peasants. Peasants forced off the land and into the cities. And so to say that like white people en masse have benefited from slavery is, leaves out the fact that working people have all been the victims of expropriation, of taking away commons for hundreds and hundreds of years.
I think the problem is as well, there are so many ways to rebalance equality in the world, to rebalance inequality in the world, and sort of this, it's almost sickening virtue signalling that really is so vague that it really serves no real purpose in actually helping the people who require it.
Well, let's give the universities of Bristol and Cambridge the opportunity to at least finish before we pass judgment on that case. Let's have a look at the back pages, though. Jackie, what's grabbed you?
Well, you know, I like looking at houses. I like looking at this one. Trent Alexander-Arnold has been a Liverpool first-team player for about 2.5 years, but he chose to stay living at home with his family, with his mum, until now. At the grand old age of 20, he's moved out into a £2.6 million mansion in Cheshire. I still think that's very young to be moving out of your family home. And what does he do when he goes there in the evening? How does he cook his meals? I'm quite worried for him.
I'm sure there are 20-year-olds out there that can wash their clothes and cook their meals, Jackie. Maybe not in your family, but elsewhere, perhaps. Thank you very much.
Bad, though. £2.5 million pad when you're 20 years old.
Wouldn't be that bad. Wouldn't be that bad. What have we got next?
Let's have a look at the sun, why don't we, Ashley and Thomas? Iron Man and a hero. Marvel is good for health, apparently.
Yes, I love this story. I haven't seen Avengers Endgame yet. So I was warning both of you not to give me any spoilers. Are you a fan of the Marvel?
Yeah,
I've watched a lot of the movies on the lead up to it, so I need to probably polish my knowledge up a little bit more. So I'm walking into the cinema with a real good context in which to enjoy the movie. But what I find funny about this in particular was this is sort of arts and health professors coming out and saying, actually, do you know what, Iron Man and Avengers is brilliant because it's good for your mental health because it reinforces how important the support system is. And I was thinking that has got to be the most contrived justification for spending your money in the cinema to watch a movie. I would not be surprised if these people are getting a brown envelope from Marvel saying, I think you should come up with some good health reason why somebody should walk into... Popcorn will be good for you. Right. That'll be the next thing. Popcorn is really good for you and it fights against cancer.
Well, good.
And a story we're definitely going to be covering a lot in the not-too-distant future. Meghan, she's being incredibly relaxed, apparently, possibly because she's watching the Marvel movies.
Yeah, so Meghan Markle is overdue. And she wants to have a home birth, and this, if you have to be induced, then you can't have a home birth, and so that, option is looking more and more distant. But I would be incredibly relaxed too if I had this team of people like attending to me. When I gave birth 11 months ago, and it was just me and a midwife and a lot of screaming. So,
well, the traditional way to do it. Guys, we will see you again next hour for bonus papers. Time though for us. Check in once again with Isabel. With us once again to review the morning's papers, the sociologist Ashley Frawley and co-founder of Challenges Northern Ireland, Thomas Copeland. Good to see you again, guys.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thomas, let's crack on with a story that I think originated in the Sunday Times yesterday, but the eyes picked up on it. Labour planning to renationalise the water.
That's absolutely right, yeah. The Shadow Chancellor was on Mar on Sunday. Basically, this is the ambitious policy that Labour Party have of renationalisation. Their entire, portfolio of policies includes water, rail, mail, and electricity services as well. But what we've recently found out is that the proposition is that Labour wouldn't pay the market price, that they would pay around 14 billion, as opposed to the market price being 44 billion. And what I find interesting about this is that there's this strong rhetoric that's being peddled by the Labour Party and its obsessive followers that, privatisation is, the workers against the fat cat capitalists who are sitting in London with their pipes. But what's actually the truth is that the people that this really hits are ordinary working class people who have their pension funds invested in the water industry. 5 billion people whose pension fund cash is all tied up in the water industry. But what I find really interesting about this is people are still buying into it, and the reason is because it's an ambitious policy that's being set forward by the Labour Party. Is it any wonder that young people are flocking to this at a time when the Conservatives can just barely... The extent of their opposition to Jeremy Corbyn is, oh, we don't like him him and we can manage things better. If the Conservatives want to move into the future with any sort of hope of winning another election, they need to be setting forth just as ambitious a series of policies as this, despite the fact that this is economically disastrous. And what I found most interesting was that the justification for the market price being 14 billion as opposed to 44 billion was that, quote, Parliament will decide the price. What that actually means is a Labour Parliament and a Labour government would decide the price almost arbitrarily in order to ensure that the virtue signalling piece of nationalisation would go forward at the expense of ordinary people.
I suppose, actually, for this to actually work as a piece of public policy, there has to be the idea within the minds of voters that nationalising actually makes things run better. And frankly, in this country, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the opposite is true.
Yeah, I think you kind of want to admire the ambitiousness and the idea of having a big project and big ideas. But at the same time, it strikes me as symbolic politics done at a really grand level. And when you do that, you can do a lot of damage without thinking about the repercussions. And you can tell that there's an inkling of symbolic politics by the fact that there was this idea of, as you said, the fat cat bankers, when actually it's pension, it could be hitting working people. That's the price we pay, and we don't think, and we want to just make a symbolic gesture.
And we saw the same lesson earlier on this year with the debacle around increase in rail prices. We were all going crazy by the increase in rail prices, but when we asked ordinary people on the street, is it better than nationalisation? They all went, oh yes, it's much better than nationalisation. It's still awful, but it's much better than it was when it was nationalised. So we seem to have this rosy, rose-tinted glasses view of what nationalisation actually is, and it's never the case.
Actually, front page of The Guardian, Labour MPs are making it pretty clear, well, some Labour MPs are making it pretty clear that they want a confirmatory referendum if indeed they're going to, lend their support to Theresa May's deal.
Yeah, so even if there are concessions around a customs union, workers' rights, and the idea that the UK would mirror EU legislation on workers' rights and goods regulations, even then they're saying that they won't back a Brexit deal because they have this idea that their voters want a second referendum, and that the local elections prove this. And I think that what's really interesting is that everybody's looking at the local elections as proof, like, look, everyone wants to get on with Brexit, or look, everyone wants a second referendum. But actually, I think that what they really showed was, at the very least, a lack of representation that millions of people in this country feel when it comes to the major parties. And I think with the European elections, we'll see what those local elections were really about. And that will be the second referendum.
Let's move on, Thomas, to have a look at the Telegraph. Gavin Williamson, still in the papers? A few days on.
I love this story. I saw Gavin Williamson and I thought, well, I have to talk about this because it's almost like something out of a movie with leaks. Who is responsible for the leak? But the problem in all this is it's a mastery in media management, in that Downing Street and the establishment have managed to get everybody so riled up about who leaked, and was it Gavin Williamson responsible? And he certainly hasn't helped his case by perpetuating all of this, while at the same time we've entirely missed the point, which is that the UK government is prepared to allow Huawei some influence over the expansion of the 5G network. This is an organisation with demonstrable links to the Chinese government and domestic regulatory obligations towards the fruition of the Chinese state, and everybody is fine with that, and we're all wondering about, oh well, is Gavin Williamson,
is he going to get a judicial
what's he like? Did he brandish a sword around his office? What about his tarantula that was called Cronus? It's a disgrace. I mean, the fact that Five Eyes, our closest allies in intelligence across the rest of the world, are saying we will not share intelligence with you unless you ensure that Huawei has no influence over your expanded 5G network.
At the same time, Theresa May was Home Secretary. She knows all of this. So what does she know that we don't, that leads her to believe that you could still use Huawei 5G technology? There's a missing link in this story that I can't quite get my head around.
The missing link is that, as Sajid Javid said at the Welsh Conservative conference only yesterday, the Tories have this new obsession with spreadsheets and efficiency. Spreadsheet Phil is the nickname given to the Chancellor. And that's because, yes, it is correct that there's an economic benefit to allowing Huawei some influence over the expanded 5G network, but at no point can economic benefit come over the one prime responsibility of the state, which is the security of its people.
Ashley, take us inside the Daily Telegraph. Meghan, a home birth at risk. What's this all about?
Meghan Markle has said that she wants to have a home birth, of course, overseen by some of the best, consultants. if she has to be induced when you go over a certain number of days over your due date and you're over the age of 35, there's more risk of the need for medical intervention. So it's better to be in a hospital. And so her desire for a home birth may be thwarted there. What I think is interesting about this, though, is that this desire for a home birth really speaks to this trend toward rejecting medical intervention in childbirth. And it's funny because people are rejecting medicalization when there are actually demonstrable benefits to be having a birth in a hospital.
Yeah, doctors, nurses, medicine.
And yet at the same time, we're totally open to medicalization of everyday life once the baby's born, right? So you have like any difficulty that a new mother feels is totally understood through the prism of mental health. And that actually has dubious benefits because we never have a public discussion about the pressures that are put on women and new parents.
So it's always advertised as giving women the choice when ultimately sometimes actually what you want is just to ensure that the birth is safe and that both parties come out of it.
Or the choice is enabled by that safety.
Exactly, exactly. Guys, we will pause there because Jackie is up at the screen with her pick from the back pages. What have we got this time?
Well, a record was broken in the Premier League at the weekend. Harvey Elliott made his Fulham debut and became the youngest player ever to appear in the Premier League, aged just 16 years and 30 days. He was born on April the 4th, 2003. But he's right back down to earth today, revising for his GCSEs, which are coming up very soon. The question is, would you bother? Would you bother revising, knowing that you're probably going to make it as a footballer? I'm not sure I would.
Jackie, thanks very much. Just a little breaking line coming to us from the Russian Emergency Ministry via the Reuters news agency relating to that. The 41 people that have lost their lives, the Aeroflot plane. The Russian Emergency Ministry is saying it doesn't plan to ground the Sukhoi Superjet 100. That's the type of plane that was involved in this incident. Of course, the investigation at a very early stage, but a mechanical error was reported. It turned around, it tried to land, took off again, tried to land, and it did appear that those close to full fuel tanks did ignite. So we'll have more on that as we get it. Ashley, wonder, just if we want to finish off our papers today and just for once actually have, on Bank Holiday Monday, something to smile about for a change. Take us inside the Times, page 14 of it. Oh, in fact, that's not the one, but we're going to look at, the other story with an animal in it, director. Times, page 14, Sweet 16. Tell us a little bit about it.
Wow.
So, yeah, apparently there were 16 puppies born in a single litter, and that ties the record for the most amount of puppies born at a time. And I can imagine that anybody who's ever had a dog have puppies, that is a nightmare for rehoming.
Any woman that has ever had a child, for God's sake. I mean, look at it.
For the mum in
humans
question.
don't have litters.
I wonder if she had a water birth.
Probably not. I mean, I'm not a great dog expert, but I'm assuming that this
That's a lot of dogs.
That's a lot of puppies, isn't it?
Big pile of cuteness, isn't it? What dogs are they? Do we know?
They're Rottweilers.
Oh,
Maybe not so cute when they're older.
The problem I've always heard is naming them. If you name them, then you'll never let them go. So the key thing is you have to call them 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 16. Because if you start giving them names...
Not even Thomas or Ashley.
Well, you keep both of those ones, obviously.
Obviously. Guys, lovely to see you this Bank Holiday Monday. Thanks for giving up your time to be with us.
Thank you.
Isabel, though, here with the weather.